What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Motor City Spartans podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jordan Ewell. In today's episode, we have part 2 of the MSU football season preview podcast. We did this last year. Eric Ty joins the program again. We talk about position by position breakdown. We also go into our picks for our guys we're excited to see on offense, on defense, and we pick game by game what we think Michigan State's going to do, some things to look forward to. The season starts just in a couple days on this Friday at 9 p.m. against Northwestern. Very excited. We had a very long conversation. I'm excited for you guys to hear that. I also wanted to just briefly mention, I didn't talk to Eric about this, but Alan Haller has been named the athletic director for Michigan State University. This is big news. He played a big role in hiring former football coach Mark D'Antonio and current coach Mel Tucker. He also played for Michigan State from 1988 to 1991 for Coach George Perlis and was drafted in the 5th round by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He had a really big support from local players, alumni, and he also went to high school just here in Lansing Sexton High School. He has a bachelor's degree from Michigan State in criminal justice and a master's degree in human resource from Central Michigan. So he is very local. He had a lot of support and excited to finally have that position filled. I'm very excited for you guys to listen to my interview with Eric. We had a great time. We do this every year. We'll see if we can check in a couple times throughout the year to see how our predictions are going and what the feeling is around the team. But without further ado, here's my conversation with Eric. All right. Michigan State alum and good friend of the show, Eric Ty. Eric, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Thanks again for having me on, man. I can't wait to talk some Spartan football.
Yeah, we have our annual Michigan State preview pod going now, and I think this is something we're gonna have to do. You know, last time I talked to you, every time I have someone on the show, I always mention what's your beverage of choice. We kind of talked about that last time you were on. So can you give me something, putting you on the spot here, but something that would be a good appetizer that you always have to have with you?
Oh, man. You know what? I'm a big fan of barbecue chicken nachos. That's kind of like a go-to for me.
All right.
Yeah, if I can get that when I'm watching a game, I'm in heaven.
Yeah, you and Mel have brought over the barbecue chicken dip, and if you come over this year, I think you guys are required to bring that. I agree.
Yeah, I will. I will, no doubt.
All right, so how we're going to do this, we're going to go through position by position like we did last year, kind of break down. This is a whole new team, so we're all learning. This is the second year in a row where Michigan State doesn't have a quarterback announced by the time we're doing this podcast. So we could be dead wrong in just about 4 or 5 days when the Michigan State plays. But we'll have to go through there. There's some things to get excited about. Obviously, with a bunch of players being unknown, it's going to be something that gives us a lot of pause, but also a lot of excitement. We want to see these guys. Once we go from there, we're going to kind of go into the schedule, break down Northwestern, that first game, but then also the rest of the schedule and what we really think Michigan State is going to look like at the end of the year. You know, last year, if we would just kind of recap real quick, Michigan State was 2-5 with 2 games canceled. They beat Michigan and Northwestern. It was a really strange year with COVID. And as you know, they came out against Rutgers that first game and really struggled. Second game, they beat Michigan. So they're 1-1. It was really hard. We were really pumped about Mel Tucker because even with such a short off season and a weird year, they were somehow able to beat Michigan. It just felt like we were going to kind of do big things. Then, of course, they had some struggles, and then they end up beating Northwestern, a game they probably shouldn't have won. So what are your takeaways from last year? That was a very strange year, but being 2-5, even though, I think on our podcast last time, we kind of predicted they would win about 4 games. I think overall, I was generally pretty happy with how the year went last year. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw some of an idea of what Mel Tucker wants to bring to the table in those bright spots, especially, with the Michigan game and the Michigan win. I mean, that was huge, especially coming off the back of a loss against Rutgers where you turned the ball over 7 times. That was a pretty tough performance to watch as a first game. So after that, watching them bounce back against Michigan, you kind of saw some of those bright spots, some of those glimmers of hope. And the rest of the season, it was kind of a wash. It was really up and down. I kind of give them a pass as far as, the performance of the first year, considering the late onboarding of all the coaches and players. And then with COVID, no practice, no way to implement their system. So, I think all things considered, they did a decent job, but this is really going to be the year where we're going to start to see, the character of the team that they're trying to build, and whether they make some progress or whether they still have a ways to go yet. So well, I'm excited to see what they put out of the field this year.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is a huge year for Tucker and his staff. Really, I think more than anything, just showing recruits kind of that this program is continuing to rise up and continuing to improve. The message for Mel Tucker with the 2022 recruits really has been like, you're going to be my first true class that he gets to start kind of normally and try to get them here for 4 years. We've seen them land some big guys, Alex Van Summeren. There's some talk about Dylan Tatum possibly committing soon to Michigan State, which would be huge. Guys like Caton Hauser, quarterback, coming in. He's got guys, a lot of 4-star guys, Jaden Magnum, that he's really trying to build that culture. But I think it's important to build some momentum. Obviously, that Michigan win last year was really exciting and got us some momentum, kind of, especially locally in Michigan. But now trying to get some of these transfer quarterbacks, transfer linemen, transfer just about every position this year coming in, trying to really up that talent to see like this is kind of what we want to see from them going forward. So I am interested, as you are as well. Let's break down the positions as we talked about. So as we talk about transfers, we got to talk about Russo, quarterback coming in from Temple, and then he's going to be battling it out with Peyton Thorne. This is something I'll let you dive in a little bit on, but the first reaction I have is this is the second podcast we're doing, second year we're doing this, and we still don't know who the starting quarterback is for Michigan State. Is this something where Russo's coming in to be a competition for Thorne to kind of see what he has and has elevated him? Or do you have the gut feeling that Russo, being the transfer coming in, is going to take that spot?
I kind of see Russo coming in and starting. That's just my feeling. I think, as a graduate transfer, he looked at his opportunities across the board and felt that he had a good chance at starting here at Michigan State. And I think he's right. Although I do think that the competition is really close. Obviously, the coaching staff's held everything pretty close to the chest as far as not naming a starter yet. But I think Russo brings more experience. Obviously, he started more games. He's got a bigger arm, stronger arm. So he's got that going for him. But he has had trouble in the past with turnovers. And so if we start to see that creep up, I don't think that there's a guarantee that whoever is named the starter is given that job all season long. I think not that they'll hit the panic button, but if a guy is underperforming consistently, then I think they're more than willing to give the other guy a shot, because I do think they are very close competitively in practice. So, I think overall, though, I think Russo will be the guy day one, and then we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah. So when we're talking about these quarterbacks, it's really interesting because we have Peyton Thorne and Russo, as you mentioned, and Russo does have the experience, as you mentioned, coming from Temple, but Peyton Thorne, to me, sometimes just has that it factor that I can't really put a pulse on. When I looked at Russo, I watched the Meet the Spartans just this past week or so. Russo did look really, really good. And then we talk about the spring practice and what that really looked like. We watched that on TV. I really thought Russo looked terrible. So the quarterback competition, just seeing Russo progress from learning the system, he kind of wants to have it. It really seems like he said he's coming here to win, the Big Ten, to win, compete for a title, those sorts of things. He's got the mindset that this is his job. Thorne did look good in that Penn State game last year. To me, it's just such a toss up. I do think if I had money and wanted to put it on it, I think we're going to see both of these guys, as you mentioned. I wouldn't even be that surprised to see them both have a role, even in the first game against Northwestern. It's going to be interesting to see how the staff really handles it. We saw this in past Mark D'Antonio regimes where we had like Keith Nickel and Kirk Cousins, and that was really annoying sometimes because we knew it just by watching the games that Cousins was the guy. Will Mel Tucker have that same philosophy, or is it going to be more, we're going to go with the guy we feel is the best? And like you mentioned, if there's a guy who's really not performing the way they want to, maybe they just have a short leash and now the next guy's up. Kind of a side note, Hampton Faye and Noah Kim looked really well. Specifically, Noah Kim, I was really, really surprised how polished he looked and that Meet the Spartans. I know like it's not a game time atmosphere or anything like that, but he can move in the pocket. He has some zip to his ball. He does look a little thin, but um, I'm kind of interested in the future, whether it's this year or in the future, if he actually competes for some playing time. This is, you could argue, the deepest the quarterback room has been in a long, long time. I really do think with Faye, Kim, Thorne, and Russo, those are four quarterbacks that really could provide some solid minutes in the future for Michigan State. Just to play devil advocate, you said Russo's maybe the guy. I'll say Peyton Thorne just because he had some experience last year and knows the offense and has that it factor. But it would not surprise me at all if we see both of them, especially Russo. Like I said, I thought he looked really, really good just this past week. So now let's talk about running backs. This might be my favorite group. As you know, last podcast, I sat down with Coach William Piegler of the running back group. I was able to ask him some questions. I'll just briefly name some names and maybe give me some thoughts on these guys. We have Walker coming in from Wake Forest, Collins, Hayward, Joyner, and Simmons, obviously the freshman from last year who really showed some skill.
So, I mean, I think to top off that group, Ken Walker is the presumptive starter. He's a home run threat. I mean, he had something like 17 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards at Wake Forest. And so he'll be like a redshirt sophomore, I think. So he's a young guy, but a lot of explosion to his game. And I think he's a difference maker in the run game. So I fully expect him to be the starter. And then I do think Simmons is going to build off his year last year. It's a crowded room. It's a crowded backfield. So we'll see how the carries start to pan out. I mean, that's what I'm really interested to see is who gets these carries and how they're going to distribute it. Are they going to have a bell cow with just one or two guys that spell him? Or are they going to be by committee, try to evenly distribute the carries? Are they going to go with a hot hand? Because all of these guys are capable. Simmons, I mean, we saw last year, he showed some breakaway speed. He's got some agility, good feet. He can hit the hole. So he's another valuable piece. Elijah Collins, we were all wondering last year, what the heck happened? He had such a great year the year before, and he was supposed to be one of our big pieces coming into the last year. We just found out in April that he had COVID, and he had some lingering effects from that. And so maybe that contributed to his play and on the field last year, or his limited action on the field last year. But if the reports are to be believed that he's kind of back to his old self, and so again, another great player, a lot of talent in that running back room. So he's another piece. So I think all of these guys, and then you still have some of the freshmen that are coming in too. So I think all of these guys are really going to be pushing each other. You're going to see a huge improvement on that side of the ball. It's just we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's going to come down to how the offensive line plays. But there's definitely, without question, more talent in that running back room. And we didn't even mention Harold Joyner, who's, a former 4-star recruit coming from Auburn. Big dude. I mean, I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's got a lot of speed too. So maybe we can see him play a part in the passing game. So I think with all these guys, these additions and guys getting healthy again, this is going to be one of the strengths of our offense this year.
Yeah, I agree 100%. This is going to be a strength. I mentioned it to Coach Piegler when he was on the podcast. I think this is the group on the team that has the most talent from top to bottom. Walker, in my mind, from everything I've read online, from every video I've seen, and from being there this past week, he looks like he's the best player on our team. He looks like he has the legs of a running back. He looks like he can make those moves. He's what gets me excited about this offense, if I'm being 100% honest. I think he has a potential to be that bell cow. But, I have no insight knowledge of this, but talking with Coach Piegler, it does seem like although they are going to try to ride the hot hand and try to have that guy, there's so much talent in this room that Collins is going to get the carries. Like you mentioned, I do think we're going to see some Joyner and some Simmons. You wonder if a guy like Joyner, you mentioned him being so big, if you're going to see him more around the goal line or how they really build him in. But like you mentioned, Collins, from everything that I've read, really seems like he's having a bounce back summer. And to me, my guess would be Walker number 1, Collins 2. You sprinkle in some Simmons and Joyner when you're able to maybe short yardage or goal line. Hayward, it sounds like, is going to be more of like an H-back, working with the tight ends a little bit even, which makes sense. He's got great hands. Getting him on the slot on third down would be the perfect way and how I would use him. But there is so much talent in this room that I'm really excited. Like you said, who gets the carries and how they're able to actually go. Best case scenario in my mind is Walker takes this job and turns out to be one of the best running backs in the Big Ten. I think that's what Michigan State wants to strive for. But there's a lot of talent, like you mentioned. I would be interested to see if they actually have more than one of these guys on the field at the same time. Maybe like a dual running back look in the backfield where you have maybe Walker, Collins, or Walker and Joyner. That would be really a unique way of trying to get the best ball players on the team the ball. I think that's something that I would consider. Again, no inside knowledge or anything, but this group on offense, that running back group, is one of the groups that really excites me going forward because the talent is obvious improvement from last year. So yeah. One of the best positions last year was our wide receivers. We had, Jaden Reed from Western transfer. We didn't really know how he was going to be. Had a good first game against Rutgers, but, we had some fumbles, ended up having a good year. Jalen Naylor was maybe one of the biggest surprises. He really had a great year last year and ended up leading the wide receivers in receiving. We have Trey Mosley, Monteri Foster, Terry Lockett, and freshman Keon Coleman coming in. Ricky White was obviously that receiver that really tore up Michigan in that second game, but as of now, he's not participating with the team due to some issues. So really we're working with Jaden Reed, Naylor, Mosley, Foster, Lockett, Coleman. I think there's a lot of talent in this group as well. It comes down to our quarterback who can get him the ball. What are your thoughts initially on guys you're looking forward to this year in this group?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you mentioned, 1A and 1B is Reed and Naylor. Those are going to be our playmakers as they were last year. It's going to be getting those guys the ball, getting them in the ball in space, and watching them work. I think that's really the passing game is going to rely a lot on those two guys. And while there's not a lot of experience depth behind them, so we just, kind of hope, as every college football team going into the season, you hope the injury bug doesn't bite you too hard because, Naylor does have a history of being injured on and off before last season. And so, if one of those guys goes down, it does put a huge blow to the passing game, where we just talked about, there's some depth in the talent at the running back room. There's not as much proven depth in the wide receiver room. There's a lot of young guys, a lot of potential, but they're not seasoned. They haven't played those big moments in Big Ten games. So you don't really know what you have in a guy like Monteri Foster or Terry Lockett. I mean, these guys haven't really scratched the surface yet, but hopefully to see some opportunities for them, because I do think after those two top guys, that the third wide receiver is going to be is wide open for the grabs. And so we'll see who steps up. I think this is going to be a hot hand situation. Who plays the best in the moment is going to be given that spot, and it's theirs to lose. So I think you're going to see a lot of rotation for that position in the first couple of games until someone establishes themselves and really shows that they can take some of the load off those top two guys, take some coverage away from those guys, let them do what they do.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that opportunity because this group of coaches, more than any coaching staff that we've had in the past, not saying that the other coaches were wrong by any means, but if you can play, you're going to play. I don't care if you're a freshman or a sophomore. We saw it last year with Ricky White in that first game. We saw it with Simmons last year at running back. If a guy like Keon Coleman, who got all this hype being a recruit for basketball and football. If you see him on social media, he thinks very highly of himself. It's not necessarily a bad thing as far as that's kind of the edge he plays with. But if you get a guy like that who's really proving that he can play at this level, he's going to play. Whether that is Terry Lockett, he was a 4-star. Monteri Foster, we got these guys, like you mentioned, Reed and Naylor are the guys. They're going to be the money makers. They're going to be the guys that the coaching staff is specifically trying to get the ball. But there is that position open for another guy to break through. And I'm looking forward to who that guy is going to be, because I do think they have some talent there. I think someone will probably step up that we kind of look back and say, that guy really had a good year. I just don't know who that's going to be yet, especially with all these new faces. It'll be really interesting to see. And then not having Ricky White, if Ricky White was on the team right now, or at least participating, that's the third guy we would be talking about and trying to have those explosive plays. Now, we get to our tight end group. It's been a couple years since we've been excited about the tight end group. Trenton Gillison is a guy who we've had really high hopes of. I know last year on this podcast, I talked about him being maybe like an all Big Ten type tight end, just a guy who could stretch the field. He had that game against Wake Forest in the bowl game that kind of was getting us excited that maybe he was going to make the next step. Tyler Hunt, which I didn't mention this when the running back group, but he had one of our 2 rushing touchdowns. The other one was by a quarterback. So we had no rushing touchdowns for our running backs last year. So only way we can go is up there. Malik Carr coming in as a transfer from Minnesota, and then Cameron Allen, a freshman I'm really excited about. It seems like they have more talent. Tyler Hunt was a punter. He's a guy who's got some athletic ability. Gillison obviously is athletic. Carr is very raw, but athletic. And Cameron Allen, to me, is a very polished tight end with his hands. When we talk about tight ends, it always comes down to, can these guys block? And we'll have to see what that comes up. But are you excited about this tight end group, or is this a group that gives you pause?
Yeah, I'm a little I guess I'm a little skeptical of the tight end group as of right now. I mean, I think the guys you're going to see right out of the gate are Trent Gillison and Tyler Hunt. I think they're going to get the primary amount of snaps, but neither of them is a great blocker. I mean, Tyler Hunt is a more modest player. He's not as dynamic, but he's reliable hands. That's really what you need. I mean, he's shown he can make plays in the red zone. And so that you need that guy. That guy can slip out and do like a tight end screen or something. I mean, he's that guy. Trent Gillison definitely stretched the field, dynamic playmaker, really athletic, but he's inconsistent. And we didn't really see that jump last year that we thought we were going to see with him. So we'll see if he makes it this year. A guy like Malik Carr, again, really young, really raw, but he could make his presence known on the field depending on how his practices go. I mean, he entered camp with a boot. So he's just now starting to practice fully. So we'll see how healthy he is and if he sees some time earlier, if he's still kind of working his way up with conditioning and everything. As that's one thing that Tucker and his staff have really stressed is being some of the best conditioned team on the field. And if he's not that way, then I don't think he'll play. But Cameron Allen, I am excited about. I think he has huge potential to be, one of the next tight ends that Michigan State's known for, producing reliable pass-catching tight ends who can block. He's got to figure out the blocking thing, but that's true with all young tight ends. He's going to put on weight as the seasons go. So maybe not this year. You might see some sporadic plays from him here or there. But I think as next year and on, you'll start to see him make a much more prominent role in the offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, as I mentioned, Hayward's going to be one of those guys too that maybe rotates in depending if they can get him to play tight end, whether that's like an H-back, whether that's in the slot. I think, as you mentioned, I think this tight end group does give me the most pause on the offense, but there is some talent there that maybe that we can work with a little bit. We talk about blocking, no bigger group that we need to talk about than our offensive line. You and I had a little bit of a disagreement on this last year. You were a little bit bullish on the offensive line, and that was one of my biggest pauses last year were our offensive line. I'm not sure if either of us, were right. I think we had some moments where our offensive line played well, but I don't think it really lived up to what we wanted them to.
I think you were definitely right there.
Okay. I was being modest, maybe. Their offensive line probably wasn't where we wanted it to be, right? Yeah. Jarrett
touchdowns by running back kind of says it all.
Yeah. Jarrett Horst coming in from Arkansas State, offensive lineman. He's the guy that I'm probably the most excited about on this offensive line, but a lot of that usually goes to the guys we don't know, right? I mean, we haven't seen him play a snap yet at Michigan State, so of course he hasn't made a mistake yet. AJ Akuri is probably going to move over. We have Allen again, going to center Jarvis and Duplain, and then Nick Samak is probably going to rotate in on the interior offensive line. This is going to be a little bit different take for me this year. I am actually more bullish on them this year than I was last year. I really think they're bringing a lot of talent back. I think Horst might be one of their better offensive linemen now. And your running backs, like I said, I think they're a little bit better. I would be very disappointed if Michigan State didn't take a step forward running the ball this year. And last year, I was a little bit nervous that our offensive line was going to hold us back from being able to run the ball. Just when we were in college, you had guys like obviously Langford, and you had guys throughout the years, Bell and Baker, and we had these guys where it wasn't uncommon for a guy to have 150 to 200 yards rushing, and we haven't seen that in a long time, where the running back just takes it over and they're able just to pound the rock. And I know they'd like to do that. If you can get a game or two during the year where you got a guy like Walker getting 150 yards on the ground, a lot of it's probably going to be from his talent, but also because our offensive line has improved. I do think this offensive line has improved. And this is the highest I've probably been on the offensive line in 3 years, I'd say. But let me hear what you have to say. I think the addition of Horst really is the difference for me, moving a Curry across the way, still having Allen there. And then it just seems like these guys have been around forever, a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll definitely be better this year. I think the biggest difference is going to be having tackles who are natural tackles. Like Garrett Horst and AJ Curry are tackles. The last several years, we've forced guys like Kevin Jarvis, and even before, Jordan Reed, who's now left the team, but these guys are guards that we had playing tackle. And then obviously we had a lot of injuries to our offensive line the last several years. So that did help getting some of the depth experience, but they were playing out of position. So I think even now, looking at this offensive line, our depth behind those two tackles is thin. So if one of them goes down, you're back to kicking out a guard to play tackle, and I think that's where you start to struggle. So if these guys can stay healthy, I think you're going to see a massive improvement on the offensive line. But if one of those guys goes down, that's what I'm concerned about is watching one injury and then it's over. So I think that's part of what Mel Tucker and his staff are trying to do right now is recruit their guys, get the talent level up so that the depth is there. But right now we just don't have that yet. So when you talk about losing a guy, your next best up, there's a significant drop off. Whereas, some of these other programs that are more established and have their guys in the system, you get one guy that goes down, there's not a huge drop off. So I guess that's my concern, but man, if they stay healthy, it sounds like Horst is really going to be a difference maker on that line. So I'm hopeful to see that and to see them stay healthy.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. Michigan State has been really going to the recruiting trail, and it's kind of like a running joke, but they're not getting a guy who's like under 6'4". It seems like their offensive line that they're recruiting is big and they're nasty, and they're really going to be a different type of offensive lineman that we see in the next 2 or 3 years, as long as these guys continue to develop and make the team and those sorts of things. But you're right. The depth behind those guys that I mentioned is thin. I guess I'm a little bit hopeful that one of these times we're going to have an offensive line who's healthy. It seems like every year we're banged up. These guys have knee braces and canes, and it seems like they're all banged up all the time. Someone needs to put them in bubble wrap and carry them around campus, I think. But in reality, though, this is probably going to make or break their offense, right? If their offensive line goes down early, or they're starting to show signs that, okay, maybe there was a hole where we didn't think there was, that obviously that affects the running game, that affects the passing game, that really affects everything, which is why it's such a focus every year when we talk about this team, how they're going to be, because it's probably going to be a big determinant on how our offense really is going to function. So we kind of broke down quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line. Give me one guy, and I'll give you one guy that you would say you are most excited to see. Doesn't necessarily have to be MVP, but guy you're most excited to see.
Oh man, most excited to see. It's probably, we kind of gave it away early, but it's got to be Ken Walker. I mean, we've been hearing so much hype about him in the offseason, and I love watching Michigan State football when we just pound the rock and we demoralize people in the run game. And watching guys like Le'Veon Bell play, it was just a different experience, and that gets me kind of excited to watch again. So he's a guy I'm really hoping he can bring that ground and pound game back to our offense and kind of help me live those glory days again.
Yeah, that was my guy, by the way, Kenneth Walker. But if I had to give you another one, Horst and Naylor. I mean, those two guys. Horst, I'll go with Horst because it kind of follows the same path there. If he ends up being what everyone says he's going to be, I think our running backs are going to do really well. And when I was talking about when we were in college and stuff, Javon Ringer was the guy I kept thinking of that I couldn't say his name out. But there were times when we were watching Ringer where he would have 200 yards. It seemed like almost every week. He was extremely underrated. And you just want to get back to the days where you are not forced to pass and you can keep defenses off balance. I am excited about this team. I think they can take a step forward. Not having a quarterback named obviously is going to be one of the biggest question marks. Tight end is going to be a question mark, but really that offensive line and quarterback is going to really determine on really how we do. So let's flip the switch, go to defense now. We want to start talking about transfers. You find no better place than every level of defense. Their whole cornerback group seems like it's new. We have a new linebacker. We have some new defensive linemen. We got a little bit of everything. So let's start with the D line. We get Drew Jordan from Duke University comes over. He's probably going to be a rotating defensive end. We get Panashuk back, Hunt, Beasley, Tank Brown comes in as a transfer. Mallory, I believe, is another guy that I've missed on here. What's your thought on the defensive line?
I think the defensive line is going to be a strength of this defense. I think they return some experience and some depth. I mean, you mentioned Drew Jordan from Duke. He started there for several years, I believe, and had really great production. And I think he's dropped some weight too. So he's kind of changed his body, become a little bit more lean and agile. So hopefully that helps him off the edge. And then, Jacob Panashuk, the guy everybody loves to hate, he's nasty. He plays nasty. He's a guy you love on your team and you hate if you're playing against him. He's pretty polarizing, but he gets the job done. I mean, he's a potential difference maker. If he's on the field and consistent and plays with that nasty streak, I mean, he can really do some great things. I do think interiorly, Jacob Slade is going to have a big year. He's probably going to be our best defensive tackle, I would say. Jalen Hunt, again, another big body in there, and a big body that can rush the passer interiorly. And I think that's something they've been missing the last couple of years, is having a big guy on the interior line that can not only eat up blocks, but can rush the passer and break through that interior offensive line. So I think he's a guy that can do that. And I think the staff's excited about him. Deshaun Mallory lost a ton of weight. I mean, they said he lost almost 80 pounds, completely changed his body. So this strength and conditioning staff are really doing a lot of work on these guys and getting them in a different kind of shape and putting out a different style of player we haven't seen the last couple of years. So I'm excited to see that. And I think the defensive line is you're really going to see that huge difference as far as physicality and body type that I think is exciting. It's going to be exciting to watch. And that's where you're going to win those games, in the trenches. So I think this defensive line is promising.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about defensive linemen who can rush the passer, defensive tackles, and things like that. The first guy that comes to my mind is Drell Worthy. It seems like it's been a long time since we had a guy in the interior that could really create havoc. And Worthy's the first guy that came to my mind when you said that. For me, not to spoil kind of the rest of our defensive talk, but for me, this is the most talented group on defense. Having Panashuk and Beasley on the corners, I think, are two of the best defensive ends State has had in some time as far as guys I trust. Like, I really think Beasley is going to have a breakout year. It's just, I thought he played really, really well last year. It would not surprise me if he has more sacks than Panashuk. I'm really high on Beasley. I think he's going to have a great year. Having Drew Jordan there as another veteran guy who, like I said, who's going to rotate. This group gives me a lot of excitement. As you mentioned, Mallory, if you see the pictures online, it looks like a completely different person. It's pretty amazing what they've done in just a short period of time. One of the position groups that we talked about last year that I was very hesitant on, that this year I'm maybe a little hesitant on, maybe a little bit optimistic, is the linebacking group. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, with this linebacking group, we're missing Jordan Simmons, or Antoine Simmons. I'm sorry. Antoine Simmons, who left this past year, led the team in tackles. But they do get some transfer. They get Crouch from Tennessee, who sounds like he's the real deal. He's very vocal. He had a press conference a couple days ago with the media. He's kind of this outgoing guy. He reminds you of Jamal Williams from the Lions. The guy, he just is very charismatic. You kind of need that in a middle linebacker, a guy who's going to kind of not be afraid to talk. And he actually was a former running back who got hurt and actually had to change positions. He mentioned that in his press conference on how he can actually read the running back and not guess, he said, but really kind of just be able to anticipate what that guy's going to do. He does seem like, he's a former 5-star running back. I think he's going to be a guy who the average Michigan State fan goes, who is that guy? Because I think he's going to stand out. Cal Halliday is another guy, along with Harvey. Noah Harvey is a guy who's probably going to start alongside Crouch, but Halliday, Tucker's mentioned it in his press conference as well, that he's this old school mentality, kind of runs downhill, can be a thumper. I think you're going to see a lot of him as well. And then you have Chase Klein. So I am cautiously optimistic because I think at this point last year, I didn't really know who was going to be the guy. I wasn't high on Noah Harvey last year. I was happy we had Simmons, but that's about all I was really confident in. Are you a little bit more confident this year, or do you feel like you're reserved?
Yeah, I'm definitely more confident about the linebacker group this year than last year. As you mentioned, Crouch, I think, is going to be the difference maker there. Really talented guy, can fly to the football. From another Power 5 SEC school. Highly recruited guy. So I think he definitely has the talent, and it sounds like from practices and reports that he is he's playing really well and taking on a leadership role on that defense, which is really important. So I think he's going to be a guy, he's going to start day one. And I think Noah Harvey will start next to him. If for nothing else, he's a talented player, good linebacker, but he's been in the system and he knows where the guys are supposed to line up. He's got some experience. And so I think he'll help Crouch with that, getting familiar with everybody on defense, getting familiar with alignment. And then, maybe as time goes by, he is surpassed by other guys on the depth chart. But I still think he brings a lot of value to the team, and he's a solid linebacker. I just think Crouch's talent is better. And I think we'll start to see that play out. We also have to mention Tank Brown, who's a linebacker from Minnesota, who we've now switched to defensive end. So we could see him coming off the edge as well. But again, just more talent on the team. And that's really the theme of this breakdown is just more talented guys on that field.
Yeah. And Tucker in his press conference mentioned that he thought there were about 5 guys on this team he thought could play linebacker and could play it pretty darn well. Kind of interesting because it didn't really seem like that was a position of strength at all. And Crouch in his press conference mentioned that, they were kind of cross-training them quite a bit. So if you remember last year, they only had about 2 linebackers on the field at a time. And then they had kind of like a monster linebacker, if you want to call that, like a safety type player. Their defense was a little bit different last year where it was like a 5-2-4. Anyways, they're kind of cross-training some of these linebackers. So I think we're going to see a mix of a lot of different guys on the field, kind of rotating them in a little bit more, especially with having some new players. But I'm excited about that. We'll talk about our defensive backs here. Last year, obviously, Shakir Brown ended up not getting drafted, but ended up being a free agent. And is now no longer on the team. But some transfers coming in, if we would have looked at this team in the spring, I think you and I could have walked on and played corner, even though I'm about 5'7", and my 40 at this time is probably about 6. But they had no one, man. They had no one in their defensive back group in the spring, and now we're in the fall and they got some transfers coming in and the group looks a little bit more formidable. This is a position that in my mind, and I'll let you talk, obviously I keep stealing all the thunder, but it's thin. It's thin. We have Kimbrough, Ronald Williams, Xavier Henderson, Angelo Gross, Dowell, Gervin, Snow, and Lowry, to name a few. I'll go into a little bit what I think, but what are your initial impressions of this group?
Well, I think Ronald Williams, coming transfer from Alabama, brings that pedigree with him. He's an extremely talented player. He's definitely going to be one of the starting quarterbacks day one. just a potential to be a real difference maker on the outside. So it's him. And then I think competing for the other outside corner spot is Kalen Gervin and Chester Kimbrough. Kimbrough is a transfer from Florida. Again, really talented, speedy, can run with anybody. But really the question for me, as far as day one starter, is going to be, does he have the system down? Does he have the technique down? Because Gervin, again, has been in the system. He knows his stuff. He knows his alignment, and he's a good player. I believe he went to Cass Tech. He's a local kid. And he really wants to be out on that field. He's showed he can play last year with Big Ten competition. So I think he's got the upper hand on that starting job, but it could be Kimbrough's talent that takes over as the season goes on. We'll see what happens, but it's good to have the competition. Gosh, I mean, we were talking about who they were going to throw out there. So there's at least competition this year. And as far as safety goes, Xavier Henderson's the leader of that defense overall, vocal leader, and he brings a lot to the table, I think, as far as coverages and run support. He's a great run stopping safety. So I think he's an extremely valuable piece this year, and he's going to have to play a really, really great season for this defense to stand up. As far as the other safety goes, Angelo Gross, who was a freshman last year, really impressed. So we'll see if he takes that next step or if he gets into a sophomore slump, but we hope to see him continue to progress and develop. And then Michael Dowell, he's the third Dowell brother to play in Michigan State secondary. So that's pretty cool. Love seeing that. Love seeing these guys and their brothers kind of move through the system. I think that's a really cool part of the program. And I hope he does well. I think he's had some interceptions last year that were pretty impressive. So more takeaways this year would be great. We got to win that turnover battle if we're going to be into these games. And last year that was a big problem. So Michael Dowell, definitely a ball hawk, and hope to see him intercept some more balls this year.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice. I look at this list in front of me, and it's hard not to feel a little bit more optimistic than I kind of, I guess, initially thought. Ronald Williams, I'm glad you mentioned him. He's the guy that I'm going to be probably most excited to see on this defense because corner is such a spot that if you have no defensive backs, especially playing teams like Ohio State or Penn State, it's going to be very difficult because they're going to be able to throw the ball around quite a bit. We talk about the defensive line being such a strength on this team. They're really going to need them to, especially early on, to kind of provide some pressure. So some of these corners who aren't so familiar with the system can rely a little bit more on their instincts rather than, trying to be covering for, 10 seconds down the field. I really think that they have talent here, as you mentioned. From everything that I've read, Ronald Williams and Chester Kimbrough are the guys that have impressed the most. But as you mentioned, Gervin, knowing the system, it would not surprise me if he's the guy next to Williams, and then you're able to rotate in some of these other guys as we go. Angelo Gross coming out last year as a freshman, all the talks ever since he's been on campus is he's very physical. He's a guy who can just make plays. You talk about Xavier Henderson. You mentioned this. He's been announced a team captain for the first game, along with Jalen Naylor and Drew Beasley. He's a guy who seems like he's been on the team forever. I'm going to be a little interested to see Darius Snow. Darius Snow, as we know, kind of a prodigy lineage he's got here at Michigan State. It's been a couple years now. We haven't really seen a whole lot of him coming from Texas. I would be interested to see what his role is, if he can crack, a couple snaps and see if he can make a difference, because he would be a guy that he was a 4-star coming out of high school. It would be really nice to see some development from him. So that way this group has a little bit more depth. Obviously we're looking more of a safety role for him, or maybe that hybrid linebacker type role, but it would be nice to see, maybe him step up on this defense. We're looking for guys to really maybe surprise us or step up where we really didn't expect it, and I think he might be a guy that we could be talking about surprising us in a good way if he's able to get on the field.
Yeah, and then another guy there have been some rumblings about is a freshman, Charles Brantley, that he's been really turning heads and impressing a lot of the coaches. And so maybe you see a true freshman get thrown out there at the quarter position. I mean, who knows? But again, it's just nice to hear that there's guys really competing for these spots. and pushing each other to get better. Competition is always going to help you, and I think it's just encouraging to hear that there's definitely more, and all the coaches have talked about it. There's just a difference in this team, and they're so much further ahead than where they were last year. So hope to see that pan out on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned him. I kind of forgot about him, Brantley. That is, Brantley is a guy who reminds me a lot of Angelo Gross as far as the hype. It seems like he's ever since he stood on campus, it seems like he's getting a lot of hype. And what's funny is he's listed at 165 as far as his weight. And I was at that Meet the Spartans. He looks like he's about 155. The guy is skinny, but I think once he's developing into his body, I think he's going to be a guy that Michigan State fans know really well. I think he has that natural instinct. I just don't know from looking at him on the field. There was a play that Jaden Reed had in that scrimmage that he beat him deep and just kind of outmanned him. You just wonder, and Reed's not the biggest guy. You wonder how Brantley will be able to get on the field early, being so small. But I agree with you that would be a great development. But it's kind of funny that you said that. It kind of reminded me that I looked, he's 165 and he does look all of 165. He's a smaller dude, but he does have some skills. So I look forward to seeing him develop and really building on, his weight. So let's do the same thing. Let's do a guy on our defense that you want to see. Maybe one guy, doesn't have to be MVP, like I said, but just one guy you're really excited to see on this defense.
I got to go with Crouch. I mean, I played linebacker in high school, and it's my favorite position on defense. I love watching them fly to the ball and pack a punch. That's football to me. And so I love watching middle linebackers play. And when you look at Michigan State and the great teams that we've had, there's always been stout middle linebacker. Whether it was Greg Jones or Max Bola or any of these guys, they just they made a difference leadership wise and in the center of the defense, like that, stopping the run and disrupting even in the pass rush, getting into blitzes. And I think he's going to be a guy that's like that. He's agile, he's quick, but he's definitely strong enough to put a stop in those holes. So I think he's probably the guy I'm most excited to see.
Yeah, I can't deny you there. Crouch, I'm extremely excited to see him. I'll go with Ronald Williams. I talked about him already. I really think, we lost Shakur Brown. He's a guy that had a lot of interceptions, and we see what winning the turnover battle does in football. And if the defensive backfield can be not only serviceable, but somewhat of a strength, and having Ronald Williams, I mean, if you think about some of the games they have to play, you got, Chris Olave out of Ohio State. You got some big time receivers in the Big Ten, Dotson from Penn State. You got from Michigan, Bell, right? He's back again. He's been there forever. So you need a guy who's going to be that guy to shut down their best guy. And whether we have that on the team, I don't know, but I'm excited to see Ronald Williams, to see that transfer from Alabama, who's been kind of lost in the weeds over in Alabama. Can he come over and really make a name for himself? I think that'd be a great story and something I'm looking forward to. So we got Matt Coughlin as our kicker. What I will say is he's had some really good moments at Michigan State. He struggled last year. I saw him kick one ball in the Meet the Spartans. He missed it. It's going to be one of those things. I think he's going to be one of those guys, if his confidence is up and he's feeling good, he's going to make most of his kicks, but there might be a slump he gets in there. We just hope that those slumps don't come when we need them the most. That's kind of my take on it. I think he's going to be a serviceable guy, and we just hope he has a good year. That's my take.
Yeah, I mean, he's shown that he can do it. I mean, he's hit some clutch kicks. I mean, it's just last year, I hope it was an aberration, because it was just every time he went up to kick the ball, even if it was a PAT, I was like, geez, I don't know if this is going in. I mean, it was so tenuous. So I'm really hopeful that he gets back to his old form and can continue his windmill celebrations, after the kick at Ohio State. I'd like to see some more of those. So hopefully he turns it around this year.
Yeah, I think we might have to nickname him Van Wilder. He's been on campus, it seems like, for 17 years. But he's got the mullet rocking. He's got the flow going. I have no problem with them. Obviously, we need him to be more consistent, but that's college football kickers. It's very hard to find a kicker who's going to just, nail 50-yarders every time. Getting him consistent would be a big help. So let's talk a little bit about, the schedule and what this looks like. Dude, we are a couple days away and we have our first game. That's why we had to jump on this podcast. Northwestern, we face this Friday at 9 p.m. at Northwestern. One of the questions I was really, what do I want to say, disappointed that I didn't talk to Coach Piegler about was what his mindset was going into Northwestern, rather than like if that second game was flipped where they play Youngstown State, like a little bit more of a traditional non-conference game. They open up with a Big Ten team, a team who was very, very good last year on the road. That's got to put a little bit of spark into them. Like, I'm not going to get ahead of the game a little bit too much, but I would argue that this Northwestern game is the most important game of the whole year. And I'll give you my take in a little bit, but what's your thought on just having a Big Ten opener being the first game?
Well, I think it's an interesting way to start the season. I don't know if I love it, having a Big Ten team at the Open. It's just, maybe I'm a traditionalist, but it's not what we're used to seeing. A few out of conference games first before you get into the meat of the conference schedule. But it is, I think, in this situation, going to be a really good measuring stick game for this team, because Northwestern is a solid Big Ten team and program. They put out a pretty consistent product every year, that you kind of know what you're getting with Pat Fitzgerald's Northwestern team. So, I think if they're able to go into Northwestern and pull out this win, it's going to definitely show some progress in the positive trajectory of the team going forward. If they come out with a close loss, I don't think all is lost, but I definitely think it stings when you're looking at getting 6 wins, getting to a bowl game, being kind of the goal for the season. If a loss at Northwestern is going to hurt you. So I am interested for sure to see this team and to see them start right out in the Big Ten schedule. Let's see what they got. I mean, put it on the table and show what you have, because you're not holding anything back. You're not playing vanilla offenses when you're talking about in-conference game. This isn't a cupcake. You gotta really play to win. And so I am excited to see meaningful football, and not get stuck in a trap game where you're upset by an FCS team or something like that. This is real deal. And so hopefully these guys bring that mentality to start the season.
Yeah, and Northwestern, as you mentioned, is a big time team that, when I say big time, they've always give Michigan State fits. They're always very consistent. They're not going to beat themselves, as you mentioned. We know what Pat Fitzgerald is going to bring. Now, Michigan State last year was 2-5, 2 games canceled. They beat Michigan, Northwestern, as we previously mentioned. So they beat Northwestern last year. Coming into this game, if you would have asked me maybe 2 months ago, I should say, would Michigan State win this game? I think I would lean towards no, just because of all the. You got Crouch as new linebacker. You have Kimbrough and Ronald Williams as your new safeties. You have, Drew Jordan, the new defensive lineman. You have Horst, who's new offensive lineman. You have, literally you could point to any position. Russo as quarterback, Walker as running back. You could literally point to any position, say they've got a new team. They got all these transfers. We're trying to put this on the fly. But the more that I look at this and what Northwestern is doing, I have to think that Michigan State's got a really good chance, and I'm going to pick them to win this game. Let's start here on what Northwestern has lost. They have a new defensive coordinator after Hankwitz retired. Jim O'Neil is going to replace him. They lose Rashawn Slater, who was a top 12 pick in the draft. He ends up getting drafted. Greg Newsome, their star corner, gets picked in the first round as well. So 2 studs are gone now. Patty Fisher, who's been on the team, it seems like a million years, is gone, along with Blake Gallagher, their other linebacker. They do have Chris Bergen back for a 5th year, who's probably going to be one of their better defensive players, but they're returning just 34% of their production from last year. So you could argue that Michigan State probably has more talent and probably more returning guys than Northwestern has. Also, although this is on the road, Northwestern on the road is not a very hostile environment. They're not going to Penn State. They're not going to U of M. They're not going to Ann Arbor. This is going to be a game where Michigan State travels pretty darn well to Chicago area. Northwestern, that game could be a lot of Michigan State fans. A lot of those guys, as we know, we haven't seen Michigan State play in a long time. They're going to be people in the Chicago area that want to go see Michigan State play, along with us just drinking the hell out of all this Kool-Aid that we're saying that we have all this optimism. Give me Michigan State beating Northwestern on the road week 1. Why not?
Yeah, I agree with you. I am going to pick them to win. I'll take Michigan State by a field goal in this game. I do think it's going to be a close game. Definitely working out a lot of the kinks, like you mentioned. This is a whole new team, and that's really going to be the story of the season, man, is to see if these guys, these new additions, I mean, you're talking about, 21 transfers and 20 new freshmen. So it's a whole new team. It's completely different personnel on the field. So whether these guys gel and take to the schemes well, that's really going to be the tell, and it'll determine the season, because in a game like this where it is a little bit of a toss-up, I think things are trending the right direction for us as this game approaches. I mean, Northwestern starting running back, I believe, got injured in the last week or two of camp. So they're already dealing with some injuries. And like you mentioned, the attrition that they've had from last year, which was a great team, Northwestern team last year, and we ended up beating them. So I do think that things are in our favor, but just the nature of the games and the first game jitters and working out the kinks, I do think it's going to be a close one. They're going to have to scratch and claw with, but I will take us to win.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about, they got a new quarterback as well, Hunter Johnson, who played 2 years ago and really didn't show flashes of brilliance. He's a guy who struggled, but obviously won the job in camp. So that's another, it's not like they have this veteran quarterback who's going to lead them either. I think there's a lot of questions on there. So why not? Let's say Michigan State wins game 1. We go to game 2. It's the home opener, Youngstown State. You would hope, they probably are going to go back on that Northwestern tape, win or lose, and have some things they want to correct. This is going to be a whole new team, essentially. And you hope that they're able to rotate some of these other guys in. This would be a game that we talk about the running backs, for instance. You have a guy like Simmons, or you have a guy like Joyner. Maybe they're able to get some more guys, some more touches in that second game where they're able to figure out whose role is what. I give Youngstown State a loss here, Michigan State a win. Michigan State's home opener and feels like forever. That place is going to be rocking. Spartan Stadium should be rocking for that game. I'll give them starting off 2-0.
Yeah, I think this may very well be Michigan State's only comfortable win of the season. It should be anyway, a comfortable win. This Youngstown State is not a good team, and so I do think that we try to work on the depth and where kind of run your vanilla plays, get your kinks worked out. This is the game to do it. This is your typical kind of tune up for the big game the following week. And so I definitely don't see a letdown. I want them to put 45 up on this team. Show that your offense has grown, that you become more explosive, and beat up on a little guy. Do what you're supposed to do. I'm tired of playing down to competition or getting stressed out for a game like this. It should not happen. Don't leave any doubt. This is a different team. If this is a new regime, you should prove it here. I know it's just Youngstown State, but you got to put them down, put them to bed early, get your backups in there to get some playing time and pad their stats and make them feel better, because that's what the game should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that energy because, we watch some of these Mark Antonio teams, and it's a blessing and a curse, right? I mean, we won a lot of games. There were a lot of games that we lost by less than 7 points. And then when we won, a lot of games we won were by about 7 points, even games that it looked like we really should have won. So it's one of those things that let's stomp on their throat, make a statement, coming home. That'd be great. As you mentioned, there's another big game. The following week, we go to Miami, Florida. Derek King, if you remember, was a quarterback that transferred to Miami. He was a guy Michigan State was actually after. He is going to be, in my mind, a Heisman candidate at some point during this year. He's got a coming off an injury, I believe, but he's a guy who can really provide some spark. Going to Miami, I think, is going to be tough. I'm going to give Michigan State a loss here. But before I kind of throw it to you, this is why I think that Northwestern game is so huge. If they were to lose to Northwestern, let's say they beat Youngstown State and then they lose to Miami, you're starting off 1-2, then starting to play the rest of the Big Ten. Also, that's the first Big Ten game. I do think, I'm not going to back down from this, I think the Northwestern game is the biggest game of the year. And of course, the world's not going to end if they lose that game. But I really think that's going to be the difference between them having a successful season when we look kind of building that momentum, and then maybe struggling out the gate and looking at more of a 500 season, or what we'd be looking at for that. So I'm going to give Miami the win simply because De'Aaron King maybe not having it all figured out. I think Miami's going to be a top 10 team this year.
Yeah, I mean, I see Michigan State losing this game. Miami's just got so much speed. They have a ton of speed, athletes on all over the field. And De'Aaron King is I think if he stays healthy this year, he is going to be in Heisman contention. He's the real deal. He's a difference maker on offense for that Miami team. And I think they play with a swagger. They play a ruthless style of football. And when they're on, they're on. I mean, the struggle that I think Michigan State is going to have is just keeping up with that much speed on the edges. We've definitely upgraded our talent level, but I don't think that we're quite there yet. And I think, like you said, Miami is going to be when it's all done, I think they'll be a top 10 team. I just don't see us going in there at a noon kickoff, hot Miami, Florida in the third week of the season and beating that team. We're just not there yet.
I will say, I think it's going to be one of the games I'm most excited to watch all year, though, because it'll be really a measuring stick to see, like, where's this program at? Obviously, it's the third game of the year, so we don't expect them to be necessarily at their peak or their best, but they would have a couple games in their belt, especially a big one against Northwestern by that time. It's going to be if they were to knock off Miami and start 3-0, let's say, there'd be a lot of momentum in East Lansing. Now, like I said, I don't expect that to happen, but it just kind of shows you the magnitude of what those early games look like. So we go to Nebraska, and Nebraska actually played last week 0. They played Illinois, and I was fortunate enough to watch part of that game. And I will tell you this, Michigan State better freaking beat Nebraska. Taylor Martinez looked terrible. If you can get pressure on this guy, they were very undisciplined. Scott Frost almost didn't make it to halftime. I think they were about to fire his ass. They did not look good. I mean, Illinois switched quarterbacks at halftime. They ended up coming out and winning that game. Nebraska is at home. In my mind, you're the better team. I don't think there's a reason they should lose this game. If they do, I would think that it would be a disappointment. I'll say not necessarily an upset, but a disappointment. I'm going to give Michigan State the win here. Coming back from tough loss at Miami. They're going to go home. If this game was in Nebraska, I might think a little bit differently just because sometimes it's a little bit different to play on the road in the Big Ten. But being at home, Nebraska, I think the fan base will really be excited again to see them. And I don't think Nebraska is that good. Nebraska can run the ball. Michigan State's going to need to be able to stop the run in that game. Other than that, like, this is a game I think they need to win.
Yeah, after seeing how they played against Illinois, okay, this is like Brett Bielema's first season as Illinois' head coach, and they went in there and beat Nebraska. So I'm not all that scared of Nebraska. I think, there's not to say that Nebraska can't win the game, but I do expect Michigan State to go in and win after the way they play and the kind of the tumultuous nature of the Scott Frost era right now and the potential NCAA infractions that are coming down, practicing, during the COVID lockdowns, allegedly. So we'll see how all that pans out throughout the season, but I definitely see that team, being inconsistent to say the least throughout the season, considering everything that's going on surrounding the program. And if the way they played on Saturday is any sort of tell, Michigan State better beat them.
Yeah. You just made me smile because I saw a meme online and it was talking about NCAA infractions and said, no way you're getting penalized because no way in hell did you practice all summer, like at all. You look so bad after that first game. So we'll see. Like you said, I think you said it perfectly. They're probably going to be pretty inconsistent. This is a game they should take advantage of and hopefully can win that game. I'm going to sound like a homer here, but we're playing Western Kentucky. It's a night game at Spartan Stadium. I have to give Michigan State the win here. This is going to be a non-conference game. Hopefully coming off a win. But a night game at Spartan Stadium against a non-conference team, you have to think Michigan State Although it could be a trap game, I would hope that they were able to pull this off. I'll give them the win here.
Yeah, this one feels a lot more like a trap game to me. Western Kentucky is a dangerous team, man. I mean, they have a high flying offense, and there are cases where teams didn't like that come into play in a primetime atmosphere in their game, man, and they're quick to score if there's a pick six on the first drive or something like that, and they get down, it could be tough to come back from if they start piling it on early. So really have to watch out for this team, I think. I do expect Michigan State to win, but this game scares me a little bit. Just with that offense being a little bit more potent than especially what they may experience the week before against Nebraska. If you're coming off a win and you're a little overconfident and overlook this game, I think they really have to be careful not to overlook this team and overlook this game. Like I said, I do expect them to win, but I think there's a potential for some scary moments, and so I hope they can fight through it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point about their offense being potent. It really is. It's really been good in the past. Being a night game at Spartan Stadium, I think, is the difference. If this was a noon game, I would be a little bit more hesitant in saying that they're going to win. It just really seems like if Michigan State can get some momentum and have the crowd behind them, this will be something that will be pretty exciting. Next game is Rutgers. So far we have them at 4-1. We got them the same. We'll see if we disagree on this one. I'm going to give Michigan State the loss against Rutgers. Although I think Michigan State is just as good as Rutgers. This game is on the road. It's a noon game. Rutgers beat us last year. And Rutgers, they kind of did what Michigan State did last year. So they brought in a bunch of transfers. They had a lot of talent. They were very inconsistent, right? That first game was very hard to watch it, to be honest with you. There were turnovers and it was very ugly from both sides. But Greg Schiano being over there, Rutgers is recruiting really, really well. That area, New Jersey area, has a lot of talent. Michigan State has tried to tap into that pipeline. I think he's got the program up and running. So to lose to Rutgers is not losing to the Rutgers of old, in my mind. I think Rutgers is an up-and-coming team. I'm going to give Michigan State the loss here, although can they beat them? I think they can. I think hopefully by game 6, Michigan State's got a lot of things figured out. But this, to me, being a noon game on the road at Rutgers, I would not be surprised if they lost this game. I'm going to give them a loss here. Do you think they're going to win this game?
Yeah, this one's a toss-up for sure. It could really go either way, but if I had to pick, I would pick Michigan State to win. And the reason is last year's game. I think there's a lot of anger and a lot of disappointment surrounding the way that they played against this team last year, how they came out of the gate and just crapped the bed. I mean, they had 7 turnovers. If any one of those turnovers goes away, we probably win that game. So I think there's just a lot of frustration, and I think they can't wait to get on the field and play against that team. Granted, half of our players weren't there, but I think the sentiment throughout the program is going to be the same, that that loss in particular left a bad taste in the team's mouth, and they can't wait to get out there and prove themselves. So I'm hoping that fire burns pretty hot for that game, and that they'll take care of business. So I give them the edge there just because of the emotions from last year's game.
Yeah, that makes sense. Michigan State was in that game, even though they turned the ball over 700 times. So it'd be interesting to see what happens this time. Next, they're going to play at IU at noon. I hate to do it, but again, I'm going to give them a loss with Michael Penix, with Freifogel. They've got a lot of talent on that offense. It just, to me, Indiana's always a close game. It just seems like Indiana is probably in that second tier in the Big Ten behind, Ohio State, really, and Penn State. I'm going to give Indiana the win on this. As much as I hate picking against the Spartans, I'm trying to go with my brain and not my heart here. If Michigan State can contain Penix and that passing game with Freifogel, as I mentioned, this could be more of a game. I think Indiana is gaining some momentum. At being at home for Indiana is going to make it very tough. So I'm going to give them a loss here.
Yeah, I think they lose this game. I think Tom Allen, like I mentioned last year, I mean, I think he he's the right guy for that program. He's turned them around, and they're not the pushover Indiana that they once were. They actually play some defense, and they have playmakers on offense. So I think this team is a pretty balanced team. I do think they'll compete. Obviously Ohio State's going to run away. I think with the East and with the Big Ten, but I think Indiana's going to be right behind them this year. I think they have a talented squad, and I think this one's an L for our Spartans.
All right. And then we get a bye week, which is nice because if we got this right, I would be coming off a 2-loss week and we're feeling not very good about ourselves going to a bye week against Michigan at home. It's the dreaded Michigan game, the best Michigan game. I don't know what you want to call it. You excited or terrified of it? It's always brings the most anxiety and excitement throughout the year. At this point, I'm not going to pick against them 3 times in a row. It's a Michigan game. They're at home. They beat Michigan last year. Michigan, if you want to talk about a payback game, Michigan fans and Michigan players are not going to be too happy how it ended last year. It was essentially one, fly route that just beat them over and over again last year. Ricky White's no longer like a part of the team right now. However, you can't convince me Michigan has a ton more talent or a ton more cohesiveness than Michigan State does, especially at game 8 in the year. It's going to be rocking. It's a home game. I'll be there, of course. So they should be winning that game, right? So I'm going to say Michigan gets upset by Michigan State, whether it's an upset or not. One of the things that'll make or break this game, Hutchinson for Michigan being on that defensive line, trying to contain him. They have Bell at wide receiver. They've got talent. There's no doubt about it. McNamara is going to be quarterback. Whether he's the quarterback by the time we play him or not, we'll see. But they have obvious talent, right? It's going to be, can Michigan State run the ball? Can they limit some of those big plays? And because it's the Michigan game, this game's always close. I give Michigan State the win.
Yeah, don't you know McNamara will probably be in the running for a Heisman by that time. If history is an indicator.
Yeah.
But as a proud Michigan State alum, I can't pick Michigan over Michigan State. I can't do it. If it was obvious, I guess begrudgingly I would, but I do think that the teams are going to be somewhat evenly matched. We'll see how the season plays out, because at this point in the season, you're really going to know what you have. And so the emotion factor is definitely going to play into it, as it always does in this game. I think the difference is going to be, as in this rivalry, as it usually goes, is the run game. Can Michigan State and Ken Walker and that offensive line run the ball against Michigan? If they can run the ball, if they can find creases on that defensive line, they'll win the game. And so I'm counting on them to do that. If they can't, if that defensive line is stout and holds up and starts putting pressure on the quarterback, if the run game falls down, then the rest of the offense, I think, is going to be hampered. So I think Michigan will win. So the running game is going to tell the story, and I'm counting on Ken Walker and that Michigan State offensive line to push them through and win by a touchdown.
I would love it. I know you would love it too. That'd be great for recruiting as well. So next, they play at Purdue. This game, to be honest with you, scares me just looking at the schedule. The following week, they have Ohio State. The following week, they have Penn State. If they don't beat Purdue, there's a chance they don't win the rest of the year. This back half of their schedule with Indiana, Michigan, Purdue, Ohio State, Penn State is really, really pretty brutal. Now that I'm looking at it pretty closely here. I think best case scenario is they beat Purdue and probably lose to Ohio State and Penn State. I just think that's probably the realistic option. I think it's very realistic they could lose all 3. For purposes of being a homer and being on the preseason podcast, I'll give Michigan State a win here. Rondell Moore is not on the team anymore. He got drafted, obviously. They have a very good defensive line. Purdue, if you remember a couple of years ago, upset Ohio State. I think they're maybe like a mini version of Indiana in my mind, where they have this up and coming a little bit coming. I mean, they don't have Freifogel. They don't have Penix. They don't have that athleticism, but I do think they're going to be a tough team to play on the road. I'll give Michigan State the win here, but I don't think this is an easy game.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think they're going to be tripped up by this game. Maybe looking ahead to some of the tougher, bigger games coming up, but Purdue on the road is no joke, and especially Jeff Brom. I think he's a good coach, and he's got the program kind of starting to turn around. They didn't have the best year last year, but he's recruiting some talent there, and I think they have the potential to play a buster. And I think at this point in the season, they may be a middling team, and I think they might have just enough in the tank to trip up a Michigan State team that, if my predictions are correct, is riding pretty high. With only the loss at Miami, I think they might get snagged here and lose in West Lafayette.
All right. So we have Ohio State and Penn State. I think we should lump these together. Ohio State, in my mind, is going to be extremely tough for Michigan State to win it. Oh, I skipped one. They play Maryland as well. So they're going to play Maryland at home. This is a game that, I'm going to say that they can beat Maryland. You and we went to the game 2 years ago, and talk about a slugfest that was so brutal. It was freezing outside. It was tough to watch. Michigan State barely pulled away that game, I believe. But this is a game that's at home, November 13th. It's going to feel like fall. Maybe now that I see that we play Maryland, I guess I kind of forgot about that on the schedule. Maybe Purdue I would give a loss to, because it's going to be tough to win all three of those games. But for the sake of this, I'll keep Maryland as a W. I think there's no reason as far as talent wise why they can't. A lot of it's going to come down to, at this point of the year, how healthy they are, if that quarterback's really taking over that job, or if they're still going back and forth. But if their offensive line's banged up and we still are kind of back and forth on the quarterbacks, of course this will be a tough game, but I'll give Michigan State a win here.
Yeah, I have Michigan State winning this game. I think Maryland is inconsistent, to say the least. I think I don't know if they even have like a named starter yet on quarterback. Last year there was a competition. It might be Tagovailoa, but there's still so many missing pieces to that team. They're a relatively young regime as well, and so I think there's enough holes on that side, on the offensive and defensive side of their roster, that Michigan State should be able to exploit it. The defense hitting on all cylinders at this point. I think finally starting to find their groove and gel as a unit. I think they should be able to take care of business and handle a somewhat discombobulated Maryland team.
Yeah, Tagovailoa had a good year last year. I think he probably still be the guy. I think just the inconsistency overall with their offense and defense, it just seems like a game they could win, especially at home. So to wrap it up, Ohio State, Penn State, jumped ahead of myself. I'm going to give them losses to both of them, as much as I don't want to. Ohio State is going to be on the road. Penn State will be at home. We know those Penn State games as the last game of the year. It's November 27th. There very well could be snow on the ground. It could be an ugly game. I just think Penn State last year really struggled. I think that was more of a blip than anything else. I have more confidence in them coming back this year with Dotson, with Clifford, with some of these guys. They recruit extremely well. They've been a thorn in Michigan State's side with some of the in-state recruiting over the last couple of years. I just feel like Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana are probably three of the best teams in the Big Ten. I would love for them to pull off that Penn State win. It's a rivalry game. I don't see it happening this year. I think, unfortunately, there's just too much talent on some of these other teams that they've built over the last couple of years that Michigan State isn't quite there yet. This would give Michigan State a 7-5 record if my predictions are correct. And to be honest with you, that's probably better than I thought going into this. I thought closer to 500 is what I was going to say. If they go 7-5 and make a bowl game, I'll be a happy camper, especially with a win at Michigan and winning that first game against Northwestern.
Yeah, I have them taking losses to both those teams. They're just, Ohio State in particular is just in a different class. It's Ohio State and everybody else. As hard as it is for us and everyone else in the Big Ten to admit that, it's pretty clear what you've been seeing on the field the last decade. They're just they just reload every year. They have a new starting quarterback, CJ Stroud, who's already being talked about as the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year. He hasn't even touched the field yet. So it's just these guys are a different breed. And I just, in both of these games, you just want to see them hang in there and compete. I don't want to see the team get blown out. If you can hang in there and compete, yeah, you get beat by a few touchdowns, whatever. But that they're in there competing and you're starting to see the progress being made. I think that's something. There's no win within a loss, but you want to see them at least, you know, respectfully play out there and play with those guys and not give up. So I think as a 7-5 record, like you mentioned, I think would be a success. A bowl game would be a success. There is a couple toss-up games in there, in particular, the Michigan game, their Purdue game, the Northwestern game. I think are really close, and those are going to kind of dictate, whether this team goes 5-7, 6-6, or 7-5. And I think the optimist in me thinks 7-5, but a bowl game, I think, would be a huge success of a season. So 6-6 would be great. I think just watching them play some postseason ball and watching them take that step forward this season with Mel Tucker at the helm would be a huge success.
Absolutely. I think we're on the same page. I think, like you said, embarrassing losses get old. I think that talent gap, we want to make sure that talent gap is just a little bit better. Purdue, Rutgers, Nebraska, Northwestern, those games are going to make or break our season, along with Michigan, obviously. But those are games they are very could win, very well could lose. But let's hope that we're talking next year on this podcast on maybe a little bit more contention for the title of that division. Obviously, Ohio State's always going to be there, but just a little bit more in the Indiana realm. 7-5 or 6-6 in a bowl game would be very, very good. I'm extremely excited for this game on Friday, playing at Northwestern. Doing this and being able to talk with you gets me pumped up, man. I really appreciate you taking the time on here. I know it's been a long podcast, but we do this once a year, and there's a reason, because we like to dive deep and get ourselves excited for this year.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much again for having me. I love talking Spartan football. So anytime, I really appreciate you having me on, and go green, baby.
Yeah, go white. We'll talk to you later, man. Thanks.
All right. See ya.